Welcome, everyone, to episode 2 to the series that I am calling Where We Are. Where We Are. The goal of this series is whenever I decide to hit the big red go live button, I'm going to hit the big red go live button to simply try to describe where we are right now at this moment in history, where we are as far as what's going on in the world around us. The goal is to try to talk about where we are and then maybe look at where we are going. At times, maybe try to offer some prediction. Now, yesterday was episode number 1, which was a spectacular failure. It was horrible. Things went wrong. We had technical difficulties. There's about 25 seconds in episode 1 of silence because I'm sitting here talking and the microphone wasn't on. So that happens somewhere in the middle of the episode. So it was a spectacular failure. And another problem was I came up with the idea. I hit the big red go live button, and then immediately when I started talking, I realized, well, wait a minute. What do I want to call this program? Do I want to call this series, really the series, Where We Are or Where Are We? Where are we seems to indicate that I'm asking a question. Where are we? Where are we right now? But where we are seems to me, I'm trying to be a little bit more emphatic and trying to tell you this is where we are right now. Where are we? I'm asking the question. Where we are, I'm trying to help you understand this is where we are right now as we speak. So that's why I went with the idea of where we are, not where are we, but where we are, because where we are, I'm trying to tell you this is where I think we are right now, and this is where I think we are headed. So that is the goal. Now, why am I creating this series? Well, I'm creating this series for a very simple reason. There are a lot of, especially right now in our world, so much is happening. And so I'll come out here sometimes to do some live broadcasting, and I'll sit down and I'll be like, man, there's that story. Well, if I try to cover all 3 of those in one episode, then what title do I give it, right? How do I give a title that lets everyone know that I'm trying to cover all 3 things? So I'll kind of struggle, and I'll be like, well, you know what? I'll just cover 1. Well, then I'll cover 1, and then guess what? By the time I'm done covering the 1, I'm out of time. I'm out of time to try to do anything else because, I can't sit here for 24 hours a day. I've got other things to do. So then I'll leave going, man, I should have at least mentioned this, or at least I should have mentioned that. So this gives me the opportunity to turn on the mic, talk about a number of things happening in the world right now, right? Where we are, and then try to figure out where we are going from there, all right? So not where are we, but where we are. I'm trying to tell you where I think we are right now, and it gives me the ability just to cover a number of topics, a number of issues, but the title is vague enough that I could be talking about anything. I could be talking about things happening in the church. I could be talking about, news related to the Vatican. I could be talking about something happening in popular culture, something happened in world news. It gives me a little freedom because I do not like to be restricted. So for the Theology Central podcast, moving forward, the goal is to try to do this, I'm going to try at different times to do this little special series called Where We Are, and hopefully it will be beneficial, and hopefully you will appreciate it because it will give me the ability to cover a lot of things, and there'll be times that I will still, I will break one subject off as its own special, as its own topic for its own episode of the Theology Central podcast. But when there's a number of things that I want to deal with, I'll just bring them all together and put them in an episode of Where We Are. Does that make sense? I hope it does. And I hope you'll be patient with me and give me a little time to kind of figure out how to accomplish this. It's just, there's so much going on. And I'll be like, man, how do I can't cover everything, but this will give me the opportunity to at least, cover a number of things. So We'll see. And the good thing is I'm not locked in. Some may say, well, why don't you just create a podcast called, Where We Are? Well, then that would be another podcast. And I don't want to do another podcast because I don't know if you realize this. I already have enough podcasts. I have enough things that I'm trying to accomplish. This is designed to give me the freedom to go, those are 4 things I want to talk about. Let's just put them all together in one episode and then I'm done. Right? And I'm not bound. And if it's its own podcast, then I am bound to, I'm basically forced to keep producing episode after episode after episode. And if I go a couple of days, I'll be like, well, I need to go do an episode for that. No, I can't do that to myself. So this just gives me a little freedom as kind of a catch-all. And hopefully whenever I do this, people will be grateful and will benefit from it. So let's do this. Welcome, everyone, to an episode of Where We Are, the series that takes some time to look at where we are so that we can figure out where we are going. So where we are, where we are, Saturday, June the 20th, 2020. Here is where we are on Saturday, June the 20th, 2020. And let's start by asking a very important question. You turn on the news and they tell you, hey, it's now ready to go. You can go down to your local walk-in clinic. You can go to Walgreens. You can go to the hospital and you can get your vaccination for COVID-19. Do you hop in the car immediately? And do you go down and get the vaccine? Do you want to be first in line or do you want to wait? Would you be concerned? How many people you think are just going to refuse to get the vaccine? And if enough people refuse to get the vaccine, then what problems does that cause in trying to stop the pandemic? Should the vaccine be mandatory? Will they make it mandatory? And if they do, how do they enforce that? How is this going to work? Now, this is an issue that you may not be thinking about much now, but trust me, within the next 6 months, this is going to become an issue. And there's going to be all kinds of debate. We're going to end up right back into the fight between those who are pro-vaccine and the anti-vaccine people. There's going to be all this fighting and all of this arguing. There's going to be all kinds of misinformation spread, all kinds of lies, and please don't fall into that. All right? Seek logical, thoughtful, well looked at information to try to draw your conclusion. Well researched information that comes from medical professionals, not from conspiratorial videos on YouTube. Be thoughtful, be careful, and just remember we're dealing with health issues. So please do that. But just you need to be prepared. So here's the question. Where we are right now is we are starting to see lots of discussion about a vaccine, and there's going to be a lot of discussion about vaccines moving forward. So where we are now is the discussion has started. It's where we're headed. It's going to be controversy, conspiracies, misinformation, and accusations, and it's not going to be fun to witness. It's not going to be fun to witness, and we're going to see how the government's going to handle it. Mandatory, I don't know. For me personally, technically, at least as the military was concerned, I was to not receive another vaccine. I could not even get a flu vaccine. A letter was written by my doctor to the commander that for me, no more vaccines. Because if you don't know what happened to me, anthrax vaccine, 72 hours later, I'm almost dead. Now I have a seizure disorder directly related to the anthrax vaccine that really has messed up my life so many different ways. Seizures, neurological issues. I won't go into all the ways. Not a good thing. And so they did not want another needle stuck in my arm for anything. Now, my civilian doctor, she's more like, hey, just go get your flu vaccine. But even though that's happened to me, make sure you understand this, I still don't fall for all the anti-vaccine rhetoric and sometimes conspiratorial thinking and really, 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 really bad information. I understand that with every vaccine, there's always the potential for risk. That's true of all medications. There's always the potential for risk. But I also am aware that in history, vaccines were very important in wiping out diseases. And I understand you have to have a certain level of the population that receives the vaccine to receive a certain level of immunity from whatever you're trying to protect. I understand there's a lot to that, but I understand there are dangers. And when a vaccine is first released, I'm sorry, if they make it mandatory for me, right, if I have to get it, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be first in line. I mean, based off what already happened to me because of one vaccination, the anthrax vaccine that really messed me up. I mean, really messed me up. And I'm not even going to get into all that. I'm going to be very skeptical. So I want you to hear something that I heard this morning, and I thought it's interesting. And it kind of relates to all of this, right? So here we go. We're going to listen to this to try to figure out, to try to look at where we are so that, we can figure out where we are going. Listen carefully.
As we wait for coronavirus vaccines, some Americans can still recall a time when polio terrorized the country every summer. Children were hit hardest, with thousands who were paralyzed or died. Frightened parents kept their children away from swimming pools, movie theaters, and other public places. Nobody knows this story better than Peter Salk. He was one of the first to receive the polio vaccine. It was discovered by his father. NPR's Greg Myrie spoke with him.
After years of research, Dr. Jonas Salk was just beginning to test a potential polio vaccine in 1953. He brought it home from his lab at the University of Pittsburgh and injected it into his 3 young sons. Peter Salk was the oldest at age 9.
I just hated injections, and my father came home with polio vaccine and some syringes and needles that he sterilized on the kitchen stove by boiling in water, lined us kids up, and then administered the vaccine.
He wasn't old enough to fully understand why he and his brothers were getting this shot, yet he remembers it like no other.
As much as I hated injections, somehow the needle must have missed a nerve and I didn't feel it, and so that has fixed that moment in my mind.
That moment also marked the beginning of the end of polio. Widespread testing followed, and 2 years later, the government declared the vaccine safe and effective against one of the most feared diseases in the country.
What happened in the country at that moment was remarkable. There was jubilation. There was such a sense of relief that this fear, which had been hanging over everyone's heads for years and years and years, was finally lifted.
It's one of the great vaccine success stories, and Jonas Salk became one of the most celebrated men in America. Peter Salk is now 76 and lives in La Jolla, California. He's also a doctor and a part-time professor of infectious diseases at the University of Pittsburgh, the same place his father did his groundbreaking work. Salk is optimistic about a COVID vaccine, but he's been staying at home the past couple months, and he cautions against racing ahead with a vaccine that hasn't been fully tested.
What concerns me is knowing that in the past there have been unexpected things that have taken place with vaccines that had not been foreseen.
Jonas Salk worked on his vaccine for 7 years before it was approved. His research was funded by charitable donations, and the journalist Edward R. Murrow asked him about a patent for his discovery.
Who owns the patent on this vaccine? The people, I would say. There is no patent. Could you patent the sun?
Then, as now, the need to vaccinate was urgent, but there were delays, Peter Salk recalls.
The vaccine was introduced, but haltingly. It wasn't done the way my father would have liked to have seen. Let's just get this out and get it into every single child's arms.
At this point in our conversation, Salk picked up a book and read a passage about this period. Some in Congress were impatient, he said. At one point, a government health official was called before a Senate committee. She was asked, why was it taking so long?
As to her failure to anticipate the need for adequate supplies of vaccine earlier than she did, she replied heatedly, I think no one could have foreseen the public demand.
Peter Salk says it took roughly a decade for the polio vaccine to be researched, tested, and distributed widely to the American public. He hopes it'll happen much faster this time. Greg Myrie, NPR News, Washington.
Now, can you imagine your dad walking home? Hey, you're going to be the first one to get the polio vaccine. I mean, I don't know how I would have felt about that. It took a long time then to get it ready. I don't know how long it's going to take this time. Let me ask you another question. What if China was the first to develop the vaccine? Would that matter to you, or would you care? China develops the vaccine. They not only do they develop it, they produce it, and then it's shipped from China here, and then you receive the vaccine. Would you be hesitant? Would you be nervous? Because obviously there's lots of controversy about how China handled the outbreak in the first place. China tries to argue, at least in some level, that it didn't. The COVID-19 did not originate in China. It came from somewhere else. I've seen, I watch a lot of international news, and I've seen interviews with people in China where they're saying it came from America. So there's lots of controversy of exactly what China's role was in this in the first place. All kinds of conspiracies floating around. So if they were to produce it, how would you respond if they were the ones to produce it? What does it matter to you? How quickly do you think a vaccine should be made ready? How much testing should be done? Should 6 months of testing be done? Should an entire year of testing be done before it's made widely available to the public? And what do we do if it appears that COVID-19 is back on the increase? If we see a major spike across the United States of America, and let's say it starts leading to discussion of another massive shutdown, do you just say, hey, get the thing ready and start injecting people so that we can save the economy? Like, have you thought this through? Again, you have to think it through because this is going to impact you. Are you going to get the vaccine or not? And if you don't, what happens if the government makes it mandatory? Are you willing to go to jail over it? You know, how do you work this? Let's listen to some things that relate to this entire subject.
In an ABC News exclusive, a look inside this Beijing laboratory where research on a COVID-19 vaccine called CoronaVac is underway with the pharmaceutical company Sinovac. CoronaVac is one of at least 11 around the world approved for human testing. Scientists say the vaccine has generated immune response in the majority of humans that were tested, suggesting it may protect people from COVID-19. Sinovac saying large-scale studies could be complete by fall. But Dr. Anthony Fauci says history in China gives him pause.
That material that has come out of there has been material that has not been first rate. So I certainly don't have as much confidence in which comes out of China than I do which comes out of the United States.
And at least 17 states plus Puerto Rico have a rise in new cases. Arizona and Florida both seeing record high increases today.
And those who test positive are almost always asymptomatic.
In Tulsa, Oklahoma, Trump supporters are gathering for the Trump rally tomorrow. The state Supreme Court denying a request to enforce coronavirus safety measures. Tulsa canceling its weekend curfew. It is the first rally for the Trump campaign since the outbreak began.
The state reported Thursday a record high number of new cases in 24 hours, 450. But President Trump this week brushed off the data.
Oklahoma has had a very low rate, relatively speaking. It is a little spike.
A U.S. official says the Navy has upheld the fire.
All right, now that was a lot of information coming at you kind of quick. Beijing, the CoronaVac, I think is what they're calling it. If they develop a vaccine and it's the first to go, are you hesitant? Do you wait? Like, do you say, no? And once the vaccine is made available, are you going to know, well, where did this come from? Are we going to be given that information? Are we going to know, which one are we using? Because there's lots of different places around the world that are testing. So who gets the one ready first? And then where does it come from? And then how does that matter to you in any way, shape, or form? Are you even going to have access to actual information? Or are you going to be relying on, conspiracy theories on the internet? These are questions. And then we've got, and I talked about this yesterday, we've got the Trump rally. that happens tonight, all right? And I stated it yesterday. Let me state it again. There are two things you need to be looking for in relation to the Trump rally, all right? Number one, is this going to explode into some crazy, wild night of chaos and violence and protests and things being burnt? Do Trump supporters start getting attacked and beat up? Like, what is going to happen tonight? That's something to be looking to. And the second thing, I cannot state this enough. Right now, we've got this spike happening in, I think, 8 different states with the coronavirus, all right? And there's already some states already backing up some of this. They were starting to open and now they're pulling back. I don't know what's going to ultimately happen, but let's just say this is what you need to look out for. The Trump rally and Tulsa. 14 days later, do we have a major spike of COVID-19 that can be traced back correctly to the Trump rally? And should he even be having the rally right now? Sporting events are still not happening. So many things are still not happening. And here's the Trump rally. I don't know how many thousands of people are going to be crammed into that building. I know they're going to hand out hand sanitizer and masks, but most of the reports are stating that most of the people are not going to wear them. And if nobody's wearing them, and that turns into a putrid dish of basically the epicenter of a spread of the virus. I mean, then I don't know. Is this a good thing? Like this is a good chance to test it, or is this a bad thing? I don't know, but it's going to be a major story moving forward, and so we need to really pay close attention to that. So the first thing I guess we're trying to figure out today for June the 20th, 2020. And figuring out where we are. Where we are right now is we still got a lot of things surrounding COVID-19. We got the vaccine issue that's going to become an issue. We got a spike in cases of COVID-19 happening at least in 8 different states. And we got the Trump rally tonight, which is going to fit in with the whole possible spike of COVID-19, or at least it's going to be a lot of attention to that. And then we have the potential for a crazy violence in relation to what happens tonight there in Tulsa. So pay close attention to that. But let's leave the United States of America. Let's go to another part of the world and hear what is going on.
Now, the world's 2 most populous nations, both nuclear powers, in a deadly face-off on a disputed border high in the Himalayas. Stephanie Tsai has the story.
Judy, that decades-old border dispute between China and India centers around the fact that there is no clear border. What is called the line of actual control stretches across the Himalayas. Tensions have run hot over the past month in this frigid place. Those 20 Indian soldiers died in murky circumstances in the treacherous Galwan Valley. There were no firearms, and there was no confirmed word of Chinese deaths or casualties. For more on this dispute, its history, and where things go from here, I'm joined by Alyssa Ayers, who's a senior fellow for India, Pakistan, and South Asia at the Council on Foreign Relations. She's also a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia. Alyssa, thanks for joining us. Briefly explain the roots of this conflict.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for covering this important and worrisome outbreak of tensions. It's important, first of all, because these are 2 nuclear-armed powers that share a border that they don't fully have. They have not delineated this border in any way. After more than 20 rounds of border talks over the years between India and China, it still hasn't been accurately demarcated. So you can see, without the ability to determine where claims begin and end, there's going to be differences and disputes over the border. And that's what we see happening. That's what's been unfolding over the course of the last month.
Do we know specifically, Alyssa, what led to today's confrontation?
No, we do not. And I'm looking for more reporting. All the reporting we've had so far has been coming from the Indian side, from Indian media. It appears that they were in a process of de-escalating. These tensions have been ongoing for weeks, as you noted, since early May. And in this process of de-escalating, somehow things came to blows.
We're hearing reports of at least 20 Indian troops that have been killed. No official confirmation from the Chinese side, but also reportedly that the Chinese used iron rods and stones. I want to ask you, Alyssa, what are the risks of escalation into some sort of armed conflict?
That's obviously what everyone's worried about. When you have a standoff of this nature, when you have, again, two nuclear powers that have a border standoff, you always worry about what the possible path of escalation could be. Now, again, it had seemed that this was going to be a process of de-escalating after a series of both military and diplomatic consultations.
I imagine that no side wants war at this time or at any time. So what would you expect to unfold next from a diplomatic perspective?
Right. I would very much hope that they continue the process of de-escalation. But I don't think we should make any mistake about the fact that when you see suddenly, all of a sudden, after more than 4.5 decades, troop fatalities in this way, it does raise concerns. So I can't imagine that there's going to be any more sanguine attitude in New Delhi about further de-escalation without seeing a very significant de-escalation from the Chinese side.
And this is, of course, with both India and China, but especially the former under tremendous pressure right now because of a pandemic.
Well, there's a pandemic. The Indian economy had been slowing even prior to the onslaught of the pandemic and the need to shut down their economy. And of course, with the coronavirus shutdown, the economy has just had the rug pulled out from under it. They were looking at a decline of something like 45% in the last quarter, according to a Goldman Sachs report. This is a real concern.
Alyssa, does the U.S. play any role in a de-escalation process between these two major powers?
Some of your viewers may remember the president's famous tweet volunteering to mediate. Neither India nor China are looking for a mediator on this issue. They have their own bilateral channel, albeit one that hasn't had success resolving their border dispute all these years, but I don't think there's a real opening. I do think the United States should place a priority to watch this closely. And I do think the United States should signal that territorial assertiveness, we are seeing territorial assertiveness on China's part around the whole region, is not acceptable.
Alyssa Ayers with the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so much for joining us with your expertise in this region.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie.
All right. So I think we could say this, that there's always the chance that a border skirmish escalates into a border conflict, that escalates into a border war, that then escalates into a regional conflict or a regional war. I think that's something that we have to be paying attention to. I don't know if most Americans are even aware of the history or even how long the border is. As far as I know, and this, you may want to verify this, China and India have a long history of troubles along this border. Okay, it's, there's no, well, I guess you can't. There's not even really, there's no demarcation, so I don't even really know if you call it a border. But I think it's about 3,488. I think it's kilometers long. I don't know what that translates over into miles, but I think it's 340. I think it's 3,488 kilometers. Let me do something really quick. I'm going to see if I can. I know people from other parts of the world, you're laughing at the dumb American, but that's okay. Hey. Give me 1 second. All right. It looks like that translates to let's see here. Does that translate to what, 2,167 miles? Is that 2,167 miles? Let me see here. Yeah, 2,167 miles. So that's 2,167 miles of no demarcation there. So basically 2,167 miles of land where you don't really know what belongs to whom, or where the starting point and where the ending point is. Now, the fact that it hasn't turned into a larger conflict is probably a good sign, but it's something that we need to pay close attention to. Now, here's the thing. How much do you want the United States of America to get involved in it, or do you just say, just stay out of it? There's always, because again, instability in a region can sometimes create instability in markets, instability in economies, which then can have a major impact. That's because all of our economies are so closely linked together. But there's that situation. But whenever the rest of the world is having issues, whenever the rest of the world is having problems, whenever it seems that everyone else is so focused on everything else, it almost seems that at some point North Korea will raise its hand and go, hey guys, don't forget us. We're still over here. And, well, let's listen.
Tensions between the Koreas are on the rise today. North Korea blew up the Inter-Korean Liaison Office, a building near the border with South Korea. This comes as North Korean rhetoric has grown increasingly hostile. Foreign Affairs correspondent Nick Schifrin has the story.
On South Korean TV, the music and image were threatening, the liaison office up in smoke, as captured by a South Korean surveillance camera, destroyed in a single explosion. The building opened in 2018, a symbol of North-South reconciliation. That year, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in had a rare rapprochement, and a sitting U.S. president met a North Korean leader for the first time.
We had a really fantastic meeting. A lot of progress, really very positive. I think better than anybody could have expected.
In the background that day, Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un's sister. But since the promises made in Singapore failed to turn into reconciliation, and the U.S. ignored a vague New Year's deadline imposed by the North, she's become more prominent. And North Korea has become more belligerent, cutting off communication with the South, and threatening to advance its nuclear program and deploy military to recently demilitarized areas along the border. And for more on this, I'm joined by Jongmin Kim, the Seoul correspondent for NK News, a website focused on the Korean Peninsula. Welcome to the NewsHour. Let's talk about the motivations for what Pyongyang is doing this. Is North Korea's wrath targeted at Seoul? Is it targeted at Washington? Or is there also an aspect to this of domestic consumption?
I would say that it's all three. The deal didn't happen between North Korea and the United States, and the year-end deadline that North Korea set for itself in Washington, it just expired. And it seems that the anger right now, it's targeted towards South Korea because from North Korea's perspective, despite all the goodwill gestures and all the agreements in 2018, from North Koreans' point of view, South Korea didn't do that much and didn't help that much as a mediator between Washington and Pyongyang. There could be domestic concerns as well. The party founding anniversary, the 75th anniversary in October is coming up, and the North Korean regime has vowed that they will come up with these dashing economic achievements by then, but right now they don't have much to boast about to the domestic public right now.
So how significant are these moves by North Korea?
The statements from North Korea in recent days were made by very high-level officials such as Kim Yo-jong, who is North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister. In March, she did start writing these statements under her bylines, but the difference right now since the first week of June is that her statements started coming out in a party daily in North Korea, which targets domestic audience, which means that her profile is going up in the domestic setting.
The obvious question then is she being groomed in some way to become more prominent, to maybe even take over one day from Kim Jong-un?
Although it seems that Kim Jong-un seems pretty healthy and very much alive, it does seem that Kim Yo-jong's prominence in recent days points to how North Korean leadership is maybe prepping her up to be a powerful voice as one of the Baekdu bloodline in North Korea, which is a very important myth a cornerstone of statehood in North Korea.
At this point, is the overall effort between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, obviously facilitated by South Korean President Moon Jae-in, is that effort effectively dead?
I wouldn't say it's entirely dead, but I would say that not much time is left now with the U.S. upcoming presidential election, and also South Korea Moon Jae-in's term not left that much. And with the U.S. side and North Korean side not being able to narrow down the gap between what they want from the denuclearization deal, it seems that realistically it's almost impossible for the three actors to come up with a solution.
Jong-min Kim, Seoul correspondent for NK News, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there you have it. I think that's very important. I was looking at something. The blood of Mount, how do you pronounce it? Paektu. Paektu. All right. I guess there's a myth there in Korea about this bloodline, and I don't know enough about it. It's something you may want to do a little research on. I thought that was going to help me. Give me 1 second. Family's myth. All right, let me get here. Okay, where is this? I'm trying to see if I have something in this article. Give me 1 second here. New strategic. Okay. I'm looking. Yeah, no, I'm not finding. There's a lot of information here that I'm looking at, trying to, man, if this would, I hate when you're trying to read news articles and ads keep popping up. All right. Yeah, that's not helping me. I was trying to find something that gives me a very simple explanation. Here we go. Okay, that's not really helpful. Yeah, I'm not super familiar with this bloodline myth that's a part of North Korea, and it explains sometimes their actions and sometimes it explains their policies. And I think sometimes we may look at that in a future episode. We may look at that in a future episode. So that we can have a better understanding of where we are. Sometimes to understand where we are, we have to understand something about the culture that we're talking about. In other words, if we're talking about North Korea, sometimes we have to go beyond the headline. We're talking about China. Sometimes we have to go beyond the headline. If we're talking about something going on in the Middle East, we have to go beyond the headline. And sometimes, at least for some Americans, they just see the headline and then they react. You're like, no, what's going on? What's motivating this? And a lot of time, and this is very important, a lot of times what is motivating is maybe some cultural myth, some religious doctrine, some theological belief, and sometimes that's driving the action. And so much, especially in a time where our country, our world is so secular in its thinking, that it ignores the underlying theological idea, the underlying doctrinal belief, the underlying myth that can be motivating something. And if you miss out the doctrine, the theology, or the myth, then you, in many cases, create policies that go and try to address an issue, but you're not addressing the deeper issue. And I'm not saying it's always easy to address these deeper issues, but I think sometimes we are so clueless. So many of our actions in the Middle East just show that we're absolutely clueless to certain aspects of Islam, Islamic doctrine, and we just act like that's. We almost treat it like it's no big deal, but it's a big deal because that sometimes explains motivation. So they mentioned there the myth. They mentioned the bloodline myth, but they didn't explain it. I hate when news reports do that. So I started looking it up. There's all kinds of articles, but I wouldn't have the time to try to work through all of those articles to give you a clear, precise understanding of it. But at some point, we may return to that so that we have a better idea. All right, so that's kind of where we are today, this June the 20th, 2020, and that kind of gives you an idea of some things to pay attention to. As always, pay attention to North Korea because you never know when something else is going to happen there. But now China and India, and China is involved in so many different aspects right now of the world. I mean, they're the center focal point of the whole COVID-19 situation. Now they're there developing a possible vaccine. They're going to be right there at the central part of all of this. And so we need to continue to watch that. We got the Trump rally taking place, and we're going to be dealing with the subject of vaccines. That subject's about to be all over the place again very, very soon. So there you have it. That's kind of where we are today. And, you can email me your thoughts about any of these issues to newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. And we'll see. Like I said, this is just going to be a series that's a part of the Theology Central podcast. And I'm going to do this whenever I feel there's a lot of things that I'm listening to that I think you need to be informed about. But I'm not bound to do this all the time because there are other things that I think are far, 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 far more important that we need to be looking at. But there are just times that I'm like, well, there's 4 things I need to talk about, and that'd be 4 different programs. And if I do it in one program, I don't even know what to call it. So that's why I'm doing this. Hopefully you will agree that it's a good idea. If you don't, feel free to tell me you think it's a bad idea. All right, I'll stop right there. Everyone have a great day. And that is where we are for Saturday, June the 20th, 2020. God bless.